So welcome back to part 2 of the POFcast's 2024 year in review. We explored some of the highlights of the activities that we've been engaged in over the last year, which is all well and good. What's equally interesting is the challenges, of which there are many, and the lessons that we take out of some of this. So where do we want to start on the challenges? Feel free to start with whatever emotionally feels the most frustrating dimension of whatever we're working on.
I think I'll pick one that I want to be responsible of talking about. It's working with the government, right? And the most, the challenge we face is the high turnover, obviously. So today we are working with this particular commissioner, or this particular minister, or this particular governor. And then, you've just picked on the momentum as you are progressing towards critical or sort of concrete stuff. And then the next day you hear they are removed. And then the new person, when they come, with the government, there is no proper handover, right? So when you are removed, you just sort of leave. The new person comes and then they start all over again. I think that's sort of really frustrating, not for us alone as POF, but I think with even other partners, that has been very big concern. But how do we resolve that? I have no idea. But this is something that really frustrates a lot of us that work directly with the government.
It's interesting because that, in a way, maybe in a different way, but in a similar sense, relates to some of the challenges we have, even in the international actors in South Sudan, that there's this constant turnover. So you have interlocutors in other agencies who come and go, and then picking up the understanding of the context and a lot of that tacit understanding of how things have been evolving that gets lost along the way too. So it's almost like it's there in the air somehow, this issue with turnover and continuity.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's also very frustrating to the communities because some of the government officials are very invested and very engaged in some of the activities that is happening in their communities. And they have managed to build a relationship with the communities where the communities feel comfortable to reach out to them to address issues that are arising. So the moment they are removed, now the communities become very frustrated on how they can continue to build on the progress that they have made when working with some of these government officials. So
we one example I could point out is the county commissioner of Likwangbe, John Goko. He was incredible. He's a person that was really had a lot of a passion. And when we talked about the Nanam establishment, especially on the UNO side, he literally sort of immersed himself in supporting the partners to sort of move in that. Well, he's been relieved. But one thing he said in one of the meetings while we were in UNO is that it doesn't matter whether I'm relieved or not. I think I'm very passionate and I wanted to keep working with you. And in a way, we were very lucky because he's a commissioner and also he comes from the Red Chiefs. And if you understand the Murle social structure, you would understand how important is it to be a Red Chief. So it's quite interesting. I hear the new commissioner is equally good, which is great. But I think for us, how do we continue working with people like John Gopal?
Exactly.
What are the challenges?
I think one of the main challenges that it's at the back of my mind is engaging the youth from the grassroots. Sometimes it's very difficult to get, quote unquote, the right youth to be engaged. So in the different meetings, even the ICJs in Akobo or the youth meeting in Gumbruk and Anyidi, so the other communities will complain, are these the right youth that are supposed to be in this meeting? And I think from the GPA side, there has always been a challenge where the representatives to this different meeting keep on changing. And the explanation that we usually get is sometimes these youth go to faraway areas like Nanam and there's no way of communicating to them. So sometimes it's very hard to track them once like meetings are happening. So they end up bringing youth who are not part of the previous meeting. So also keeping track and building on previous conversations become very difficult. And I think this also encountered this with the Jonglei State youth representatives, where at one point we had youth who are not from the local communities, not engaged, not from the cattle camp youth. We had youth from associations that are based at the national level. So sometimes when we have representatives like that in meetings, it's somehow reduced from the quality of the conversations that these communities can have among each other, because they don't understand the real challenges that the communities at the grassroots level really want to address. So I find that quite challenging.
Fortunately, that particular example on the Jonglei side, I think it's been more anomalous, the representational things, because as long as we're focused on the armed youth structures, they're pretty coherent and clear, even though we know there are sort of frictions, particularly on the White Army side at the moment. But this issue on the Murle has been persistent throughout, and we haven't really managed to identify a mechanism for representation that is feasible, because obviously we could get representatives from all the villages every time, but logistically and financially that's just out of the question. So working out what actually functions, both in terms of what's perceived as legitimate by the Murle themselves as representation for their interests at an intercommunal thing, and also what's perceived from the other side as sufficient continuity in the process in terms of interlocutors. On that, I always think back to the meeting we had in Rumbek when we took the Dinka and the Murle leaders to Rumbek, and you had at that time the late Fransawi from the Boer South.
Yes. And
when he was challenging the Murle, you had the Turial, also late, unfortunately, who was clearly the most forthright and, in a way strong of the Murle delegation, but from the Lukwangale side, so not directly facing Fransawi's community. And Fransawi couldn't understand why, when he spoke, then this young guy, Kamalach, young Karenin youth from Manyavol, got up to respond. Yeah. And so then you had that whole explanation coming from the Murle side of it. Well, no, that's not how our community works. Even if I'm more senior from this side, I can't speak for them and the issues that they have with you on their side. So, but we haven't fully managed for that to be internalized on the Luo and Dinka side, this dynamic of the Murle, and haven't found yet.
No, that's really quite good, because I think on the flip side of that, when we look into we are now trying to find ways that we can work with the Murle community. But I think if you look at the Nuer and the Dinka, it's very formal kind of a structure, but their social fabric on the Murle side is completely different. But I think one of the reasons, one of the key aspects we need to look at is how to sustain the leadership themselves, because these youth leaders, once you identify them, they have to go and hunt for what needed to feed their families and all that. And all of a sudden, as Minagano said, they find themselves at the outskirts and there's no network communication. So the next meeting comes, you can't reach them. And the natural obvious thing is to say, who else could we pick? And when you bring new faces to the ICGS meeting, then the questions comes in from the law and board side, like, who are these? We don't know them. But I think we just need to understand that a little bit. And I feel we need to be partners. We need to be a little bit flexible and try to find ways to work and get a target group and continue to see how we can sustain them.
The more I think about the representation, I begin to question myself, where does the power really lies? Sometimes we think we know, but we really don't know. And when you look at South Sudan, I think this question is not only at the grassroots level with the decentralized structure of the Murle community, but even at the national level, you really don't know where the real power lies. And this keeps telling us that we really need to continue to engage the communities to try to understand, because what is true today sometimes may not be true the next day. So it's like what we are doing, we are continuously learning and learning what we think we have learned. And yeah, quite interesting, but can be hectic.
Yeah, so the other challenge, we talk about the communities and all that, but I think there is the issue around partner coordination, how we work together as partners, and accountability aspect of it as well. So that's been quite doable over there. I would say where we are now, I think there is a bit of improvement. When the area-based programming, the RSRTF came in, there's sort of a strong foundation and trying to work together, but initially a lot of partners work in silos. The coordination wasn't really quite on point, and you see issues around duplication and still. But now where we are, you're looking at a lot of competition among the resources. There's a lot of competition, but I think it's something that I think it can save us and the community a lot of money if we can nail it and have a proper coordination. You can still do all different things, but I think it's layered in a way that you complement each other when you go to a new place or when you are starting a certain program. How do we continue to talk with each other? But within the coordination also, there is the aspect of the national, the international, and the UN agencies. When you have a consortium for example, no offense to the UN agencies, but I think they see themselves above sometimes, that they have a separate mandate. But when you look at it properly, I think it's sort of disadvantage others. So we need to be very transparent and open on how we can work together, especially looking at how we can get the national organization at the forefront, and then the rest of us come behind and sort of supporting them. So we haven't got there yet. So the coordination is still an issue.
And even that disconnect, with all of that in mind, the disconnect between the implementation level sometimes and the Juba level. We had this scenario where we agreed amongst all the partners at the implementation level at a learning review workshop, because there's such an emphasis on learning on a particular course of action, which then with some agencies was effectively vetoed once it reached Juba. And so it was left hanging. Even though those who are most familiar with the context and understanding what really strategically was needed had reached a consensus.
Yeah.
And it not really even being a conversation, it just sort of fizzled out in the bureaucracy of some of the Juba institutions. So it becomes pretty challenging to. But as you say, there've been some good moments of coordination too. In part one, we talked about the Nanan establishment. And that's been a really great convergence point around coordination and implementing off the back of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing is logistically, it is quite difficult to implement activities in some of these locations that we work in, because some of these locations are also not accessible by road. You have to fly people. Sometimes you have to charter planes to get people to the other side, and it's quite expensive to implement activities in those locations. And that also depends on the different seasons of the year. During rainy season, it becomes even more difficult and complicated. Activities that you plan for few number of days can expand simply because flights cannot land. You have to cancel because flights cannot move to some of these areas. So I think that has also been quite challenging.
Challenging and expensive,
Exactly,
Yeah.
Challenging and expensive.
And it's the only way to do it, right? Until we have internet connections in all these locations, we cannot have intercommunal conversations without these
Exactly. Yeah.
Managing these.
I was just thinking, geographically, I was trying to put Jonglei GPA together as a map and compare it to whatever country, let's say in Europe. I don't know, but it would be quite interesting to see the size.
I think for one thing related to the Swiss, we mapped Switzerland on top of it, and it's basically the same size as Switzerland. Switzerland back in the day had a challenge because they've got lots of mountains, but so they need to come and build some of their trains or something. As through Jongo Energy, yeah. But so any other key challenges before we move on to some of the lessons that we're taking forward?
I think one other challenge that we need to look at, or we are struggling with, is the government engagement and those expectations, of course. And even out of the Governors Forum recently, we talk about the salaries haven't been paid for about a year. And now, as partners, we come in with our own focus or our own strategic plan in terms of peace, and you want the government to be part of your process. And that becomes really very hard to engage government officials if you are not quite clear or about you are not clear, and also have solution for some of their expectations. And as some are very small, some are very realistic, and some are very unrealistic. And that is really a huge challenge that partners haven't really worked it out. But I think for the Jungle GPA, the beginning of the project, we looked at coming up with the memorandum of understanding on how we can outline some of these challenges and see what the government can do, what the community can do, and what the partners can do. Unfortunately, there's been challenges even within that to get this MOU across the line so that it's actually signed and then implemented. So it's quite difficult. And now we are coming at the end of the year, and that process hasn't kicked off. But that's very difficult.
It's a dilemma, right? Because on the one hand, there's all these assumptions around the government and the way they manage things, but on the other hand, they're the legitimate authority in the places where we're working, and they're not being paid. And so, how to find the right balance in terms of the engagement?
But if I can just ask more practical thing here too, is the question of DSA, for example. You have the UN agencies have their own figure in terms of the DSA. You have the national organization with their figure, and then international organization. So then the government officials that you are trying to engage in your program will have questions. Why today I'm getting this figure, tomorrow I'm getting this figure? Even the harmonization of that, it's even difficult within us as partners to sort of say we are not equal. So that was quite clear in the MOU, but then we haven't got it signed. So you could see someone goes, very simple thing that you'll think that, we can work it out. But it sort of create a lot of setbacks.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the responsibility for that not being signed, we're not putting that on the government. It's been collectively, we haven't managed to drive that forward and get it over the line. I mean, this question of incentives links also to the communal governance structures as well, because we're coming from this mentality of, okay, we're doing all our work as partner institutions, and then we just expect people to rock up and so forth. But if we're serious about these intercommunal governance structures, they're performing a role that has value for the communities. So how are we recognizing that value and having a proper conversation that has a kind of dignity on both sides to it around what that should look like, and then agreeing that and moving forward accordingly. So
this is quite important point, Rob. When I look at it, we talk about ownership, right? A lot of the time we try to push the community back by saying, but this piece is your piece. But then, like the other day, I was in Motor. When I go there, I get paid, right? I'm sitting there, engaging in the activity, I get paid. But then we are asking someone, like, for example, the youth leader in Walgett, he walked over 6 hours to come to this meeting. That's a massive commitment. So now I'm questioning. I get paid saying that, but this guy who walked all this time and being there and committed to sort of help, then at the end of the day, we are questioning if they ask for a DSA, we kind of question. Yes, and for me, I see there is something wrong even with us partners. Attitude-wise. Yeah, attitude-wise, and how to sort of work that. Yes, the agenda of ownership is a separate thing from meeting some of the expectation or some of government official or the structures we work with, the women, the youth, and the chiefs, who we know don't get paid.
Yeah, I think this brings in the question that can we eat peace?
Yeah.
So these people have worked for 6 hours and they're not looking for food for their families. Their families are expecting something as head of families for them to provide, and then we expect them to go back and without giving them anything. So can they?
And if I could just add one thing very quickly, so exciting. We had a conversation about DSA, right? Whatever the transport investment, whatever the name for it is.
In Motor.
Now. It was just last week. So then, of course, they were given something small. And the next day, when we were taking the group to Akobo, the youth leaders to Akobo, 9 of them, they went to the market, bought soap, bought There was soap, which is a common one. There was sugar. There was all that. And then carrying it back with them. And I felt, man, look at that. So basically, we're injecting in the local economy of motors, right? Per annum.
Yeah.
And then plus now their families back, whatever. And some of them are going to sell some of the bar soaps that they have. So at the end of the day, we really need to think about that.
Yeah, whereas as an international, my DSA, I spend like 5% of it. I keep the rest in my pocket and I go and spend it in Nairobi when I want to leave. So from an economic lens, it's like, yeah. So let's move on to, there are many more challenges. We could spend all day on challenges, including accountability, some of the challenges around the abductions, prevention and return of abductees, but we'll maybe come back to some of these themes in future episodes and with some people who are working more directly on some of these questions. But with some of the challenges we've discussed in mind and generally speaking then, have we learned anything this year that we're taking into next year?
I think for me, really, there's of course lots of lessons that we're carrying forward. And some of it we've touched on when we talk about some of the challenges we are facing. I think we need to find a better way on how we, the partners, can be held accountable as well. Because we think that we are doing everything perfectly. But I think we need to come in and also be held accountable. And I think I wanted us to reach in a position where the community can question us. Because at the moment, the community thinks that we can only question the community, even including the government. But I think the government and the community can question the partners. For me, it's a learning, it's a lesson that we will need to look at it, and that we are equal partners. We are here to facilitate the process. We are here to support the community, and they can hold us accountable equally as well. So I see there's always a gap on that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting lesson, and I think it's somehow coming up in some of the conversation, because I remember in Akobo ICJs, the youth were asking, you said you would do A, B, and C. Can you tell us what you have done? So I think we need to encourage that kind of conversations, like you say, and see how far we can be able to push it to a level where we're able to also account to the communities as we expect them to account for us. Yeah.
It kind of links with that is, I think, one of the things that we need to be able to do in order to be usefully accountable to communities is to be able to adapt to deliver the things that they're identifying as priorities through the structures. And obviously it had been programmed in, but I think it's a lesson that this modifier line that's being put in, for example, the RSRTF in Jonglei GPAA, to a lesser extent in Konkoch, and obviously POF is more adaptive in terms of how it can deploy its pooled funding as well. That's what enables us to be responsive. When organizations get their budget, it's all programmed into the bureaucratic structures for the next 2 years. Even when you have the willingness from other partners on the ground to cooperate and coordinate and respond to emerging requests, we can't, because there are those bureaucratic impediments. But with those modifier lines, we've been able to actually come together to respond around certain things, like the Nanan establishment, like the engagement with the spiritual leaders, and so on. So
even sometimes very simple activities that just emerge out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Because I remember there was a mobilization, rumors of mobilization around Kadiang, that the board team have to say, for us to stop this, we need to go there.
Yeah.
And so people were able to quickly put together a modifier concept, and this youth, the area team were able to go there and engage the youth who are allegedly mobilizing, and they were able to say, for us to stop, do this and this and this. So this is really quite interesting, and also it supports the idea that the context is not static. It keeps on changing. And if the context keeps on changing, we also need to be very adaptive and flexible in our approach, because what you have planned in the beginning of the year may be a completely different case in the middle of the year. So I think that approach has been very useful.
Exactly. And that adaptive programming thing has been on paper in every program for a long time.
Yeah.
I think the lesson is that it means nothing on paper until it's enabled in a budgetary operational sense. And that's what started to happen more on some of these programs.
I also, this question of ownership, right? You talked about it for many, as we design our programs on paper, as well as you just mentioned, we look at the ownership part. What is ownership when you are actually not engaging the community in that sense for them to feel they own the process? And for example, how many of us will sit around the table and try to design a dialogue or try to design a program minus the community or the government, all right? So then we think that we are doing ownership. No, that's not ownership. We can't promote ownership in that sense when you're able to bring something ready-made to the community. So we need to look at that. But also these issues around decision-making, right? We talk of ownership, but then at some point we are holding back on the decisions that the community can't make any decision. So I guess the challenge for us is now, as a lesson, is that how much of what we do, how much can we give the community for them to actually make decisions? They can decide what this is what needed to be done, and we partners can be very comfortable on that because the community have said this is what we want to do. So it's quite incredible. So in the meeting, again, I'm referring to Motor last week. We looked at the White Army looked at their priorities, and then eventually they looked at the internal relation with their neighbors is becoming an issue, especially the Gawa, the relation between Gawa and Lon Nuer. And particularly then the youth leaders or all of them said, look, we want to go to Gawa areas, particularly in Mogok, Payam. But then now, yes, it's their decision. They made the decision that they need our backing. And so immediately, the flexibility we had with civil affairs at the time, there was a small resources pulled together, given to them with their work over that. So imagine if we would have said, oh, sorry, it's your decision, but sorry, we can't back it up, we can't solve it to resolve it. So for me, it's a great initiative that we begin to trust the community, we begin to trust the government and see them as equal partners in whatever we're doing.
And I think this also links into the question of accountability that you talked about earlier, right? For us to be able to say we want to hold the communities accountable, they should be the one coming up with this decision, because they should be the one coming up with this decision, and then they own it, and then we ask them, you decided this, what have you done? But now if as partners come up with our decision, with our ideas, and we expect them to do it as we have come up with, at the end of the day, they will tell us, you came up with that. We did not say we want to do that. Saying it becomes very difficult to really hold them accountable.
Absolutely,
yeah,
100%. And that links in with the this whole question of the localization agenda, which, given that we've discussed some of the other challenges at length, probably that deserves its own POFcast episode, which links in with questions of value for money and so forth as well. But moving forward, we're coming into a dry season, which in a way, in the context here, particularly in Jonglei GPA, is as much as anything what heralds the new year, so to speak, which happens to coincide with POF years. What are we looking forward to? What does all this mean for the next 12 months?
I think the first part of it is looking at how do we, this is a question of dividends, right? How do we really try to push that forward so that the whatever process we have embarked on since when we had the PRA peace agreement, now the dividends part of it comes even more. I think that's what we are looking at moving forward. How do we, the issues around the cattle trading, the VSLAs, and then the peace farms, fishing, so that peace can translate into something for that, and brings in the question, can I eat peace? So we can answer that question and then focus for next year. I think we'll cross the line. Not yet 100% peace, but relative with peace.
Yeah, interesting. I think what I'm also looking forward to in this coming year is how the women's program can be able to expand. I think this is a program that we started in August, September, I don't remember, and it has grown in the Jonglei, GPA, and Lake State, and now it has a new name, Bridges of Peace.
Bridges of Peace in the tagline.
Bridges of Peace, and the tagline is Dear Chaganon. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Absolutely.
So the Dear Chaganon is basically 3 words that comes from the Nuer, Dinka, and Murle languages, which means women creating peace. So this is a name that these women from these 3 communities have come up with, and they are very passionate about working together as women from communities that have history of fighting among each other. They are very passionate about working together and building relationship that can translate into bringing peace within their communities. And so I'm looking forward to that. Some of them are very excited about how they can also be able to work with women to take part in peace initiative within their communities. And this is a conversation that have been happening for a very long time. How do we bring the voices and the presence of women in processes in a very meaningful way? Not necessarily just ticking the box in the agenda by saying we have this number of women and this number of women. So really, I look forward to this program, striving to bring women who can be able to bring substance into the conversations that are happening within their community. So I'm excited about that.
So Rob, talking about women, the other key thing that I think came out from the PRE peace agreement is this question of the abductees, women and children that are abducted. So for us next year, really, all the partners is really focusing on how we can get this right. When we got it right from the beginning, when the peace agreement was signed, a number of children and women were returned to their relatives and families. It was quite powerful, and that really helped push the process ahead. And somehow, we as partners could admit that we dropped the ball in that a little bit. But if we can really focus and come up with a proper strategy on how we can do this and keep pushing this agenda in the community, working with the local community, the different instructors, women, youth, and chiefs, and then, of course, the commissioners to at least this push in and return more children and women, I think it will be great. So it's the focus now is looking at how can we even do better with that.
Yeah, and it's possible. It's not that it's some impossible task. There's been progress. There's been setbacks, but we just need to look at how that can be driven forward. All of this needs a level of coherence to the resourcing of it, and there's all sorts of coordination questions. But the strategy, say in Jonglei GPAA, the question in a way I feel like shouldn't be who does what. It's like, what is collectively our strategy for Jonglei GPAA, and then how do we resource that effectively and efficiently and economically given the challenging funding environment. And I think that's an invitation also to donors to really ask the question, are we interested in continuing to invest in Jonglei and GPAA? And if the answer is no, fine. If the answer is yes, then unless we're having a coherence, it's going to continue to be an inefficient kind of piecemeal approach. And the level of coordination, as you mentioned earlier, I think that we've achieved is not perfect, but it's shown that there is progress that can be made on this front when the right enabling structures are there. And that, again, is going to have to link into the localization, this conversation, which is not just something that is important in its own right, but it relates to how efficiently and economically resources can be invested. So a lot of what we're talking about simply isn't going to be possible without donors and others being on board around an investment in a strategy, not in one organization or one program or one consortium, but a strategy that we agree has some traction. Any last thoughts before we leave it here for today? And
so for me, I'm really excited looking at the prospect. But the last thought, we are now moving towards dry season, and anyone who works in Jonglei GPA knows what that means. So for us being vigilant and for us to keep really working together with our partners, which is the government and the youth, and hopefully we can have another successful dry season with no mass mobilization. So I really hope that would happen this year. We just concluded a meeting in Mortot of the law youth structure, which also they reaffirmed their commitment to fix, but there is a lot of work that needed to be done.
I agree. I think it's been an interesting year with challenges and so many lessons that we can learn. So I'm looking forward to 2025, where we're able to use the lessons that we have learned this year to make our programmings and intervention better. And I'm also looking forward to the engagement with the spiritual leaders, because as you say, we're getting into the dry season, and maybe usually a season where youth mobilize and raid, but also the spiritual leaders have very key role that they play when it comes to mobilization and the blessings of the mobilization. And we already have some programs lined up for engaging the spiritual leaders. So I'm looking forward to that and how we can be able to effectively engage the spiritual leaders to reduce the chances of mobilization and cattle raid among the three communities.
Great. So we've covered quite a bit in parts 1 and 2. There's some things we haven't covered. We haven't looked particularly at the whole capacity development agenda of POF. Capacity development is something that's been given a lot of hot air over a long period of time. So we'll add to some of the hot air, but hopefully also with some very practical things that are emerging around that, but not for today. So we'll look forward to that conversation. And if anyone listening, I think we all agree, has ideas of things that we should discuss or people we should engage to discuss with, POFcast is an almost blank canvas. We've given a few little brush strokes on it today in the discussion we've had and with the women's POFcast we had earlier in the year. But what lies ahead we can all put together collectively. So if you want to find out more information, or anyone wants to find out more information, once again, there's pofss.org and there's peacecanal.org and various other links to all manner of things through that. Thanks, David. Thanks, Minagano.
Thank you. Something lovely.